Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
The Defense Department is once again facing scrutiny over how it handles sensitive but unclassified information after a new watchdog review found that widespread problems identified years ago remain unresolved. Federal News Network's Anastasia Obis is here with more detail. Anastasia, thanks for joining me.
Hi, Terry.
Tell us about this latest review and what the Inspector General found.
Yes, so last year, the IG was looking into something completely different. At the time, they were reviewing Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's use of Signal, the commercial messaging app, to discuss operational details of airstrikes in Yemen. So that is when they identified broader concerns related to how the Defense Department marks controlled unclassified information, or CUI. The issue was most likely so widespread that they felt the need to issue this management advisory. Management advisories are usually for letting organizations know that an urgent issue was found during a review. And these management advisories give organizations to kind of fix the problems before someone requests a full-on audit. In terms of what the IG found was that DoD organizations often didn't mark CUI documents properly. So CUI documents often did not have the required designation indicator block, the block that includes the CUI category and the originating DoD component or office. And what the IG found was that when they did have it, the organizations often defaulted to restrictive dissemination controls, such as federal employees and contractors only, rather than not using limited dissemination controls at all.
So this is not a new problem, right? Back in 2023, the DoD IG conducted an audit of the department's CUI program. What did they find back then?
Yeah, so just a little bit of background. The CUI program was established in 2010, but the Defense Department implemented the program in 2020. So in 2023, the IG had a full audit of the CUI program. The Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security, which oversees the CUI program, they collect and publish their own data on the error rate of CUI markings. And in 2023, the office said that based on their internal review of over 48,000 documents in 2023 and 26,000 documents in 2024, the components reported that only 9% of the documents in 2023 and 11% of the documents in 2024 did not have that CUI designation indicator block. But during the audit in 2023, the IG office said the problem is way more pervasive than that. According to their non-statistical sample of 300 documents, they found that almost 50% of the documents did not have that designation indicator block. They also looked at 40 different types of documents. They describe it from the same originator supporting the same operation. And they found that 70% of those documents were either not marked at all, or they were marked with legacy markings, such as for official use only. So that's something that we don't use anymore. And at the same time, the documents that were properly marked were over-restrictive.
Anastasia, what's causing these ongoing problems? What is the root?
Yeah, so there are a couple of problems, but the IG talks about the office having conflicting and insufficient guidance and training, and then a lack of enforcement that causes personnel to default to restrictive markings, or it causes them to default to avoiding marking documents altogether. So back in 2023, the IG office issued 14 recommendations. 6 still remain open. And now in this 2026 advisory, the IG had 5 recommendations. I think they went back to 2023, saw the recommendations from that audit, realized that a lot of those issues were unaddressed, and then they addressed it in the 2026 advisory. So far, the Intelligence and Security Office already updated the conflicting information found in their frequently asked questions training aid on their website, but recommendations to revise guidance and training documents to clarify the implications of using limited dissemination controls, that recommendation remains open.
How consequential is it when documents are improperly marked? Either they should be CUI and they're not marked, or they shouldn't be and they are marked.
Yeah, so if it's too restrictive, the Defense Department cannot share information with Congress or other agencies. If it's improperly marked, it costs money for industry because industry has to decide whether they should incur additional costs outside the scope of the contract or they should risk a security incident. Those are the options that they have. I spoke to Bill Greenwald, who's a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. He took it a step further, and he said that this is already costing the government and industry billions of dollars to comply with the program just through the CMMC, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification process. And, there have been very little to no debate on the effects of CUI. And also, he said that this proliferation of markings such as Fed only, it's just a new way for the Defense Department to keep Congress and the public in the dark.
Anastasia, the marking of documents really has humans at the center of it. And you mentioned the problem with training and guidance with all of the churn in the Defense Department's workforce over the last year. How are they going to keep people trained and up to speed on the new guidance if they're trying to address the problem?
I think they first need to start with updating that guidance because, like the IG found, there's a lot of inconsistencies and conflicting information within the guidance. And the workforce, they do their best.
That's Federal News Network's Anastasia Obis. Anastasia, thanks for bringing us this story.
Thank you, Terry.
You can find the full details at federalnewsnetwork.com.
Sean O'Keefe, former Navy Secretary, NASA Administrator, and senior leader across multiple presidential administrations, reflects on the principles that shaped his long federal career. In this episode of Lessons in Leadership, he joined Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA, to discuss motivating teams through uncertainty, leading across agencies, and staying rooted in mission during times of public scrutiny and change.
Hello, and welcome to the Lessons in Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Sean O'Keefe, former NASA Administrator, former Deputy Director of the Office of Management and Budget, former Secretary of the Navy, former Comptroller and CFO of the Defense Department, and Professor Emeritus at Syracuse University's Maxwell School of Public Affairs. Welcome, and thank you for joining.
Well, thank you, Shane. Delight to be with you. Appreciate it very much.
What first drew you into public service, and when was it evident to you that leadership was an important part of the roles you played?
Well, I grew up around the public service. My dad was a career naval officer. He was a submariner, and we lived all over the place throughout the country. And as a result, I got an up-close and personal understanding through him as well as through all the folks he associated with and the environments he was working in, just what the extraordinary value is of public service and what is it that would motivate people to want to be engaged in it and to be really involving themselves in what is something larger than themselves. And the only place that is really formulated properly is within the public sector and the public service. That again is the beneficiary or the beneficiaries are the citizens of the nation, the community, and the region in which you live.
Did you think about leadership early on, saying, I need to be a great leader, and therefore I'm going to learn how to do it, or did you just naturally evolve into it? Any thoughts on that?
I guess it evolved by the great good fortune of being a witness to several really extraordinary leaders, people who really did take the initiative to engage others in the task, to pull together and motivate folks to really contribute their very best to achieve an outcome. And I saw the value of that on multiple occasions and found that was the primary ingredient, the trait, the characteristic that needed to be exhibited, is the fundamentals of leadership in moving everyone engaged towards a common objective.
You have served under several presidents. Can you talk a little bit about that? What were there challenges to overcome, or were you away from politics so you didn't get? Talk about that a little bit. How does it differ as you serve through a transition, or does leadership stay the same?
Oh no, it's it's really critically important in transition cases, to be sure. But the two presidents that I served in their administrations were President George H.W. Bush and President George W. Bush, in two different eras, obviously. But as a consequence, that was the closest I came to understanding the nature of the individuals who were in that ultimate leadership capacity, and their capability to motivate. Both of them were just extraordinarily inspiring people who motivated everybody to be part of the solution. But most importantly, they also had a capacity of really designating what needed to be done, and you knew that they were perfectly prepared to do it themselves. And that made the task that much more achievable. There were several different circumstances, and understanding what the objectives of the senior leadership are all about.
You've worked for different kinds of organizations, political administrations, and then government departments, agencies, and then private sector, and now academia. How does that affect your leadership style? Or do you find that leadership, the core tenets of leadership, are applicable no matter what the organization you find yourself in and having to lead? It doesn't matter where you are, that the core leadership characteristics are the same? Are they different? Are you adapting?
Well, there's a common myth in my judgment, and I'm probably the minority view of this in the academic field of public management. That common myth is that you can't apply the same principles in the public sector that you do in the private sector.
Yeah.
I never found that to be an impediment.
Okay.
It was always a circumstance where, strategy, the focus on the talent, people engaged, the process to going through decision making, the integrity imperative that must be there in order to demonstrate the absolute conviction of what's intended here, as well as the moral standing of what it is you're attempting to achieve. All those factors are very much the same. It's going to have its nuances, and there are very distinctive, differentiators within those organizations and those sectors. But at the same time, those basic principles, those tenets, foundations of what make up organizations and organization theory, in so many ways are fundamentally the same. And how you employ those may be slightly nuanced to match the condition, but they all are imperative in the same direction.
A little bit of a different direction. You were part of the very first cohort of what is now Presidential Management Intern Program, later became the Presidential Management Fellows Program. What did that early experience teach you about leading within government?
The Presidential Management Intern Program, as it started, was designed for just that purpose: a focus on public management, a focus on implementation. And its evolution over time has been extraordinary. It mystifies me why that has been the subject now of an executive order that has dismantled it. And it's absolutely unconscionable given the nature of the hundreds, thousands of people who've moved through that program in the course of the last nearly 50 years that have gone on in some cases to be senior executives within the federal government, and in other cases, they've moved on to other kinds of pursuits. But even with that, even for those who have left the service, they walked away with an appreciation of what public service is all about, why it matters, and why this is so critical to get it right. Because by and large, the reason why these functions are delegated to the public sector is because no one else can do it. Usually that's the case. It takes that kind of focus of a public entity in order to achieve an outcome that frankly would not be achieved in other spheres. So as a result of that, it gave me an incredibly in-depth understanding of that process at a very early stage in my career that has lasted the entirety of that professional experience.
A closing question: who has influenced your leadership style, and what about their example stays with you? And that question can be cast broadly. So, inside government, outside government, perhaps not government at all. Somebody that you've met, reported to, been mentored by, a broad net. But when you think about broadly, when you think about who has influenced you, who comes to mind?
I would have to say that the number one, hands down, greatest influence during the course of my life was my dad. He was an engineer, so everything was a calculated risk. I think I was probably 25 before I realized the answer was not to be found for everything in a slide rule, but that was his bent and his mindset. And he taught me how to think critically. And it really was one of the most extraordinary attributes. And he was an inspiring parent and mentor in so many ways. And all the different things I've done throughout the course of his life, I had the opportunity through much of it to be able to consult with him on a variety of things, and always walked away with a more informed perspective. Dad was an extraordinary public servant in his own right.
Well, Sean, thank you very much for sharing your insights and experiences. It has been a pleasure talking.
I'm delighted to be with you, Shane. Thank you so much for doing this.
And this is Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA, reminding you to empower your team and embrace challenges. Until the next time on Lessons in Leadership.
Find the full podcast and future episodes of Lessons in Leadership on the Federal News Network app and anywhere you enjoy your podcasts.